It is 7:30, so liking to be punctual, I will begin, but other people will be joining us. So we've got 42, which is fantastic. So welcome to you all, and a particular welcome to Finbar, who I hope you are able to unmute yourself, Finbar, because you're brilliant. Got a bit worried there. Who's the co-host? Now, Finbar is a creative director at Aardman Animations. He's also a writer who lives in the hills of Wiltshire, and he's come to talk to us tonight. He's a man of many talents. He's fond of botany. He's good. He's an artist, good at drawing, and he's good at writing. He is a creative director. He's a writer with experience of working with all sorts of people: broadcasters, publishers, media, entertainment companies, and mobile and gaming firms. He's founded digital ventures. He's pioneered interactive drama, cross-platform TV projects, and he loves developing analog and cross-platform TV projects, particularly interactive content, particularly for children and for teenagers. But I'm not sure he's going to talk about any of that tonight, except for his writing, because he's just published his first book aimed at teenagers called Witch, and it's set in the Civil War of the 1600s, Charles I's Civil War, and the witch hunts of 1646 to 47, a novel about magic, he says, realism, siblings, and family. And I won't say any more. Hope your appetite's whetted. Mine is. And I've read the book as well, but I've whetted my appetite all the more.
That's great.
Thank you so much for coming to speak to us. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Sydney. It's lovely to be here. Lovely to see you all. And yes, so I'm going to take you through the publication journey, really, of Witch and what my book focuses on, and the kind of the style of the book and the things that I encountered as I worked on it and as we brought it slowly to publication. So that just gives you a context of what I'll be talking about. So I can share my screen, can't I? Let's see. Can you all see that? Can you see that? No. Yes. Can you see this? Can you see the presentation? Yes. Okay. Great. Okay. So hang on, I'm getting my notes here. So a little bit about me. As Sydney says, I'm a creative director. I've written for years, on and off, bits and pieces, mainly for the interactive things that I've worked on. Lots of games, lots of apps for children, lots of things for sort of CBBS. I work at Aardman Animations at Bristol, and I've worked there for about 8 years. And it's a great place to work because there's always something very creative going on. Got complete mixed people, whether it's the people working on the stop motion for Wallace and Gromit and Shaun the Sheep. In fact, I'm working on a Wallace and Gromit project at the moment that I've been a lead script writer on. So it's a great place, and I've learned a lot from Aardman. Aside from that, I guess that a few years ago I started to get kind of a bit itchy feet. I've always been writing and dabbling in things and collaborating with people, and I really wanted to do something for myself. So that really is what led to this kind of publication journey. It's what led to the book. So the book, loosely, that I'll talk to you about, is called Witch, and it tells the tale of 15-year-old Eveline, or Evie, who with her sister, younger sister Dill, they witness the murder of their mother by witch hunters, and Evie is consumed by rage, a fury to avenge her mother's death, at the same time to keep her younger sister safe. And that's the setting of the book. Can you see that, Tom? I just want to make sure you've all seen that. Yeah. Good. Thank you. So this is really where it all started for me, and it was thanks to help from my sister, who very nicely and secretively paid for me for a week at this lovely place called the Avon Foundation. And they've got it's a creative writing retreat, and their methodology is based around writing workshops. And they've been going since the 60s and built an incredible reputation for really writers of all different shapes and sizes and different set of starting, or whether you're writing your 3rd book or 5th book, it doesn't really matter. So that's really where it started for me. I went there for a week. The theme for that week, which you can do different things, was writing for young people. And there you go. I dug out an old picture of all of us. This is our workshop group. And that's really where this journey started for me in terms of starting to write again. I've been writing lots of bits of films. That's what I brought with me. I had some little short film scripts. I hadn't written any prose for a long time. And the heart of it is these workshops. And I'd never been to a workshop before. I didn't really know what a writing workshop was. And you'll see right in the center, that woman right in the center, the blonde-haired woman, the main tutor there with Melvin Burgess. They're both writers, and he's the gentleman just sitting to the right of her. And they were our tutors for the week. And through them we did exercises, and we learned how to tap into our teenage memories and emotions, and about what it is to getting close to those feelings again. And we've all been young people. We all have a sense of what it's like when you're growing up, and the kind of tensions and excitements and frustrations about that, entering a teenage world, and you're on the cusp of adulthood. And that's really what it was all about, tapping into that kind of thing. So Lucy, right in the middle there, I had such a great week, and I started to write. I started to really write, and had a kind of breakthrough in her workshop. And she encouraged me to apply to her day job, where she works at the at Bath Spa University, the MA in creative writing for young people, which I duly did. And the thing that I had started writing at Avon, I continued to write. So I went there in 2013, kind of September, and I guess I applied about 6-8 months later. And at this stage, I was getting up very early in the morning. My kids were pretty young, so it was kind of making sure that I was up, before then to do about an hour or so of writing, and just keep tapping away and finding a way with it. And very fortunately, I was lucky enough to get accepted on this degree, this MA. And so it had this rather August surroundings. When you go there, we all called it Hogwarts. This beautiful Elizabethan Methuen building called Court, which serendipitously was just down the road from me. I live in a place called Box outside Bath, and Corsham is where my 2 kids go to secondary school, where they drive. And I had no idea that this was there. It was incredible to kind of almost go up north to Hebden Bridge, to then find the heart of this beating heart of writing right on my doorstep. So it felt good. It felt like a good thing to do. And I was there part-time for a couple of years. Yeah, that's really the first steps which started to happen. So it began with a brief in our first term, and it was write something with an historical setting. We had lots of different briefs, we were trying different age groups that first term and finding our way. And this one was very open. So I had a deadline, and I started to think, you know, God, what am I gonna write? And I'd always remembered my mum had mentioned the Pendle witch trials of 1612, where a number of women were hung for so-called practicing witchcraft. And I thought, this is interesting. You know, maybe this is an opportunity to explore that as an exercise. And it certainly would give me a rich historical angle. You know, there was something that had actually happened, that there was that you could look up and explore. And it was set in this kind of beautiful, you know, beautiful countryside setting. But I also thought, well, I live in Wiltshire. I want to base it, if I'm going to write about that, I want to base it here. So I took the inspiration of the Pendle witch trials and kind of made it my own. And you know, started to think about this projected image of witches that we've had really since the trials for centuries. What does that mean? You know, what would it mean to be a witch? And because the premise of the course that I was on is writing for young people, that initial spark came down to when I was walking and thinking, I've got my deadline, I've got to submit something for workshop next week. Really, it came down to this initial thought that if you were a young woman, a young girl who'd grown up in a witching way, in that kind of family context, and grown up with healers and people who'd followed this kind of practice, you know, and a witch hunter suddenly came to your home, what would that be? What would that feel like? What would you do if you had a younger sibling? What would you do? How would you survive? So really, I was out walking the first lines of the book, and I'm pleased to say those first lines that have stayed in the book. They came to me, and I ran home with the dog to get them down. So I submitted that, and I knew that I'd written something good. I'd written something that I liked, that had a voice to it. And the heart of the MA, I dug these out earlier today, just to kind of is delivering work each week to, you know, a group of other writers, and you're giving and receiving critique. So these were, in fact, I've kept them. I kept all my writing work from the workshops. This is that first submission, and I was submitting it to other writers in my group, and we're all giving and receiving critique. And some of it is hard to take, but it's ultimately about forgetting about yourself, about your ego, and remembering this is about a story, and you're taking on board feedback. And it's an audience. What workshop really did over the couple of years is it gives you a microcosm of what hopefully you'd hope one day you're going to have with your own book, your future publication. You're going to have an audience, but the good thing about this is an audience who are giving you direct feedback, and the one that you can talk to. So yeah, there you go. Those are my early stuff. And we jump on the end of that. I continued writing, which I took that first exercise, that first chapter, thinking, well, my goodness, how am I going to continue this? And you keep going. The heart of the MA is effectively a thesis, which is your manuscript. And I got to the end of that process. And what's lovely about the course is that we put on a graduation show, and the core of it is producing a published work, an anthology that we all put together. Being creative director, I oversaw the cover design, and it was lovely working with the students of the Bath illustration design side of things, and they illustrated the anthology as well. So it was a real lovely thing. It was our show put on as a book, and then we had a big night in Waterstones, and you invite agents and editors there, but mainly agents. It's about really getting something hopefully that's going to represent you. And on the night, I was lucky enough to meet a few agents, and I had representation was offered to me a few days later by a woman called Catherine, who's my agent now. I was lucky, you know, I got a few offers, but I felt that Catherine was right for me. She didn't offer me representation right away. We had a few meetings, and she sent me some notes based on reading this first draft. And as she said, you know, my manuscript was going to need a lot of work, and I really liked that about her. I knew in my heart, I was excited about the challenge of digging into it. I knew in my heart that it needed the work, and here was somebody who wasn't just going to rush me to market, that we were going to work on it together editorially, and rewrite it. And so, you know, this writing is, you know, it is all about graft when it comes down to it. And I remember this and other than the energy of being on the MA, there are two bits of advice that I always kind of keep coming back to, and that's one of those, my lecturer who worked with me on the as I evolved the first draft. It's very simple. 300 words a day is a chapter by the end of the week. A chapter generally being about kind of 1,500 words to 2,000 words, and that underlines to me in terms of actually that you don't have to think about the mountain. That it's an impossible climb, just think about things in little steps, and that really helps. And Julia Green, also another children's author, and she was the founder of the Bath Spa MA. Writing is rewriting. I didn't really know what that meant for a while, and thinking, well, I've got to the end of a first draft. I mean, I've done it. Surely I've done it. And slowly over those kind of, when I got representation, we were working closely with Catherine, I understood what that meant. And there you go, I dug out my little screen grab of all the drafts that we went to. Assume that there's 1 to 3 before that as well. So work from graduation to submission in autumn 2019. And really over that time, I found my feet as a writer. I think the MA had given me a nose for it. But writing is about, as I say, hard grind, killing your darlings, taking tough decisions. And it's ultimately about finding the heart of the book. And for a long time, my main character's sister, Evie, she witnessed her younger sister. I had a draft where the younger sister dies. And it was shocking. And I was positive that this was the way it was going to go. And it took really till quite late, kind of draft 6, 7 for me to realize while talking to another writer. And he said, what's the emotion you want your readers to take away with you? And that this very bleak ending that the main character survives, the younger sister doesn't. And from there, I think, well, actually that change, bringing her back to life, I was so ecstatic because it meant that younger sister was suddenly talking to all other characters I invented, and the book went unlocked almost. It kind of got a structure and a circularity, and I knew kind of a lightning in the bottle moment, even though I'd gone through many successive drafts. So we were there, a big blue line on submission. We were ready. We felt we got there. And the AE Publisher Commission, I was last year, October, pretty much a year ago, commissioned by, they're called Head of Zeus, my publisher, and the children's imprint's called Zephyr. And Head of Zeus are relatively new. They've been going since about 2012. They were so passionate, really, that they came for Witch very heavily, right from the first emails. And I knew from the first meeting that they were the ones for me. And really from the get-go, as soon as you get commissioned, the publicity machine begins, and this is my kind of first taste of it. There we are, almost kind of we're out on the internet already, and it meant I'd started work with the publisher and the editor. This is Fiona Kennedy on the right, and authors. I've included this here because it's an important part of the publishing journey. Authors need to work out their place with how they want to deal with publicity and how they want to deal with social media, because publishing has changed and it is all social media orientated. So, and it's about putting yourself out there, really. So I had to be comfortable with that. And there was Witch being included in the sales part of the sales catalogue. So I was already presenting to the sales team at Zephyr. But anyway, a little diversion about Zephyr, and this is about, now I want to talk about how we built the book. And what I see is the integral building blocks of Witch, the cornerstones of making it. And yes, it's a lot of writing and thinking, but it also comes down to some fundamentals, some key elements. And these are the things that, as far as I see, that carry the readers through. And I just kind of wanted to show you the paragraphs of Witch to show how these elements all need to be in place. This is a children's book ultimately, but it needs to appeal directly. It needs to appeal directly to them. And what that main character Evie is going through. She's 15, and it needed to echo her life. So yes, she's a witch, but she's also a young person. So the heart of the book is her, and her voice. It's a first-person voice. It comes directly from her. So you're seeing the world through her eyes very, very closely. And as I say, that kind of opening line, "I never did know magic," was right there from the get-go, and I keep true to that voice. That was very important. And you know, as I started to imagine her and work on how Evie should be, I thought, well, because she's a witch, how would she sound and how would she respond to things? She's been brought up in what I call the witching way, but she's also a teenager. She's trying to find her own way in life. That was her mother's setup, and we've all had that kind of tension. So I wanted it to be, she was, you know, she had a, this is the context for her, as part of her DNA. But it was also about giving her difference, about transporting the reader to another world. It's a very important aspect of that to immerse young readers. So how would a witch sound? I wanted her voice to sound strange, but also have an element of the West Country, which was my setting, and to make her something you hadn't experienced before, but also to give her a recognizable edge, not to make her too arcane. And I thought, as I gradually went into her character, I wanted, because of her witch DNA, that she'd evolved this close connection with nature, and she maybe have a tension as a teenager with her mother set up and the way that she'd grown up, but it's in her makeup to commune with the natural world. So that became a really important kind of steel thread for me to write to when I was writing Evie's voice. And you know, writing is to be read aloud, and it's a very important part of writing. I think anything that I write, but I think very, very pronouncedly so for Witch. I wanted to, all connected with that way that she was different, the way that she had this connection with nature, but she should be lyrical, and that I wanted her words to enchant the reader, frankly, to cast a spell. And that was a theme that was very important to me. And I just want to play a little bit of Gemma Whelan's narration. So Gemma Whelan was the actress who's done the audiobook for us. I was very excited about this because I don't know if any of you have seen Game of Thrones, but she's one of the characters. She plays Yara Greyjoy, one of the terrific character, really strong character in Game of Thrones. So it was a lovely happenstance connection with fans of that. And my only provision for this was that she needed to be able to nail the kind of Somerset burr. And I hope this is going to play, that you'll be able to hear some of this.
We listened among those tall bodies of blue and black and grey. Then slight, then stronger came the sound of voices twisting through the branches.
Hang on, go to the beginning.
We listened among those tall bodies of blue and black.
Sorry.
Grey.
It's giving me, I don't know why it's giving me some from a while ago.
We listened among those tall bodies of blue and black.
It's playing it later anyway.
Then slight, then stronger came the sound of voices twisting through the branches. We were too far to hear what they sang. It was the coven for sure. For witches do love to sing. Come on, we are close. The Dill pulled me back. Dilly, we aren't going there. You swore to me. No, Evie, look. A shape came on through the trees. Its white hands like gloves, hair long to its waist, as a blanket of silver threads. Dill drew behind me. Silence, but for those singers weaving their words. Evie, what is that? Shh. I would not be afeared. Yet I felt my heart hammer so hard it might echo among those trees. I am Evelyn of the Birds.
There you go. Sorry, I got the wrong clip for you, but anyway, you get the idea. And I knew also instinctively from the start that this wasn't just about Evie. She was my main character, but that Evie would have a younger sister, and it was important that they were some years distance apart. to make them have their own tensions, their own needs. So she's 9 years old in the book, and she's referred to by Evie, not by herself or her mother, as the gifted one. It's a kind of little slur just to build again that tension. But Dill does have talent, but it's born from her youthful kind of excitement and curiosity about the world, and she's very kind of joyful all the time, to make her kind of a counterpunch really to the kind of teenage grump sense that we will recognize that's in Evie. So she had to be very different from the main character. And I'm a sibling myself, and I really wanted to talk a lot about that in this book. And being a sibling, it's a connection you don't really have with anybody else. You don't have it with your parents. It's a different form of love. And there are tensions, of course there are, but there's also intense closeness. Your siblings know you very differently than anybody else, really, and that was very important for me to write about. It came from me in that sense. And I really wanted to talk about the things that a sibling nature throws up. You're responsible for a younger one, but also that's frustrating, having to tag them along and trying to drag them through life. You don't really want to have to do this. It seems a bit of a chore. But also I wanted to talk about how they find peace with each other. And I realized, as I said earlier, by that 6th, 7th draft, that really Dill needed to be back in this story, that she demanded her place. As she'd done kind of all the way through. And it was interesting as I was writing it and working with other people who give me feedback, and they're like, "Well, I love Dill. Where is Dill? Why?" And people always respond to anything. We've got to let that character be. So really, in that sense, is that structure. It starts and ends with the sisters, but I'm not going to give you any spoilers if the people who haven't read it. This is a period book, after all. So the details needed to be right, and there's one thing: establishing voice and getting the kind of letting your imagination fire. But you put it in a place where you needed to do some. You couldn't avoid it. There's research involved. What a period! The English Civil Wars. Once I started dipping into it, I was a little bit overawed by it to begin with, but I wanted to just share some of the books that I read. I mean. This is an incredible book, Diane Purkis, where she just looks at the Civil War, but from the people's context, and it's just kind of superbly written, and I referred to it a lot. This is an excellent primer, a little slim volume, just in terms of like, oh God, what was that date? If you had to remember, certain things. And I didn't also. This book isn't from a historical novel point of view. It's not. I don't talk about dates, and I don't talk about places, but I know where they are. That's kind of the research that I did, and I know what the details need to be. So I didn't frame it that way, but very positively, I knew that the timing of this was very important. It happens at 1646, and at that time, that's when Charles, summer of 1646, that's when Charles was pretty much defeated. The first Civil War. There's obviously another one that came later, and over that, it's shocking. Over that first, the first 18 months of that, everything was turned upside down. And the research that I dug into, I discovered that law and order had broken down. The normal run of judges would travel, so they weren't in all kind of local pressure. That broken down, so it became local authorities that were doing it, kind of local magistrate, things like that, or a local lord. Still kind of exposed to all the pressures that were going on, and obviously you had the splits between people following Parliament and the King. So the research was fascinating, and it also started to give me really good grounding for where I had my setting, but also historical setting, a context of where I wanted to put this story. And again, these books, so if you ever want to dip into it, John Rawson is really good, just in terms, again, the people of war and what happened to them. So I dug out a lot of these books, and they kind of sat by me. I would dip into them often. And this is kind of the classic, the Civil War times, Christopher Hill's The World Turned Upside Down. radical ideas during the English Revolution. It is about the people that came to the fore, the fanatics. The events as of all had never happened, and the fact that the king was beheaded and ultimately later, but he was defeated. It was shocking, and it led to an explosion in social, religious, philosophical thinking, and kind of shocking and exciting time. And this Christopher Hill's book is a classic, all about that, what happened and the ideas that fruition. Also, surprisingly, book called Witches. There was lots of researchers into which so this is quite a tome following the witches through the centuries. This is a very gruesome book, but also necessary because it catalogues in pretty enthralling detail all of the trials that happened, and again, that lots of kind of anecdotal details and things like that, but and things that where names go missing. I made that part of the book, that these people would go on trial, but they wouldn't be recorded. So a lot of people lost their lives, and we just don't know who they were. And of course, I came across the witch hunter, Matthew Hopkins, who was working out in the kind of east of the country, East Anglia, 1645 to kind of to 7 really was his campaign. And this woodcut is, it's very famous, and it has built that propaganda really, in the sense that he wrote a book himself called Discovery of Witches, and I'll go off and read various bits and pieces of this. So this is his own propaganda, and building this kind of sense of these wicked monsters that these women were, and nobody really knows what Hopkins's kind of motivation was. He came from a fervent religious background, but there were a lot of people at that time. A lot of Puritanism was the key religion. You had Catholicism, which was being put down, and again I talk about that in Witch a lot. Was he just an opportunist? He suddenly became very famous, but really over the period of about 18 months, well over 100 people lost their lives, innocent women and children. So, and that became, once I read more and more about this personality, that was become a central theme to it, and how I could build in a pushback against this image, this propaganda, this piece of wood, this woodcut that you can see, and tell the stories and imagine the stories for witches, thinking what they really were, rather than this this grotesque that had been portrayed. Also, some of my research was, as I said, I wanted to set it in Somerset and the Mendits, and that's where this is all placed. So we'd go off for long walks, take the dog again, poor old dog, and we'd walk the hills. I'd take lots of photographs, I'd sketch, I'd do writing, and what do you know, obviously around there's lots of witches as well. There's Wicky Hole, so it's interesting in that sense. I've included that image because one day I was walking around it. Propaganda is still going on, right? That all the way back to that woodcut, that grotesque again. That's in a sense a piece of entertainment. So interesting. And this is also about finding the magic of nature. So this is a tree near me, and we often walk the children up through the woods, and we call this tree the wolf tree. It's kind of broken and burnt, and but it had a creature, and it written into the bark, the way it had broken, and I'd sketch it and look at it, and it formed part of my story. So I was starting to think about the magical universe that the characters would occupy, and the kind of rules for that. Central to this, there's a magical object in which the children, the sisters, argue over, and it's given to Dill, the younger sister, flying stone, and their mother uses it in her spells, and has a power, but also has a kind of danger to it. So that was important. I found that stone on a beach in Cornwall, of all places. So, and that's my daughter's hand. So she's age and all that. So I was starting to build again context for the rules and the magic, the way that would connect with nature. This is another photograph I took somewhere called Cookworthy Nap, and anybody that goes down to Cornwall a lot will know this clump of trees that people call it coming home. We pass them all the time. We can't go to Cornwall a lot, and I've got so many pictures of Cookworthy Nap, and it really started to become embedded in my imagination. Just the way that those trees would sit at the top of the hill, and the different elements of light that you'd see through it, and I'd sketch it and think about it, and it again became an important part of this very bounding with nature, but the way that magic can be formed part of our imagination, and it's kind of magic is what you make of it, and that's an important part of Cookworthy Nap. So there you go. I put in a little pictures of siblings best we could find. So they are these themes again that were developed is about siblings themselves. It's also about friendship. In the heart of the book, halfway through the book, Evie meets a woman, a lady, a noble lady, and she's helped in this scene. Evie's running away from one of the witch hunters, and this is the first element of time that she meets somebody she terms Lady Green Eye, which is called Lady Whitaker, but this is how Evie sees her, and this woman intervenes and stops the witch hunter from harming Evie, and they get into a fight. Again, don't want to give you too many spoilers, but the important thing about this for me in terms of including friendship as a central element through the book is I wanted this, it's kind of joined to this theme of female empowerment and this kind of pushback against propaganda and hysteria and how witches are being portrayed, and the torrid time that a lot of women had, but depend really across social barriers, that in the same way she was a noble woman, but she was having her own problems. She's also experienced subjugation. So it was an unlikely friendship, and then this is where I started to play fast and loose with historical accuracy. I didn't really care about that. I wanted to put these two women together, one from a noble background and one from another place, and so a kind of lower social setting for Evie, and see what would happen, and see and for them to find common ground, and as that went on, it becomes a kind of clarion call in the book that they work together and push back against patriarchy, against male domination, and that was a really important element for me. It's also about prejudice in Witch. I mean, we have talked about that earlier in terms of the way that the trials are spun out and the way that somebody like General Matthew Hopkins used hysteria, whipped up the fervor of the mob, and this is how propaganda works, right? It's very clever, and that image that I put up is a projection. It's not how these women were, but it's how they were. That's how they were perceived, and it can then manipulate a mob to create one voice, drowning out all others. And I wanted to talk and explore about how a mob can be very dangerous, and can lead to wars, can lead to all sorts of issues, and we're not free of that issue. It's still going on, and it's very important that this is a historical book, but it also has themes that are very relevant today. And Evie is sheltered by another family in the midway through the book. They're related to this noble woman that she meets. They feed her, they tend her wounds, and there's a little girl in their midst. And I think these are really kind of my favourite scenes of all to write. And that this ostensibly dark witch, this dangerous individual, she meets a little girl who just wants to play with her. So that was bringing elements of light in there with the darkness. And as I said, over the course of writing the book, this theme of female empowerment just grew stronger and stronger. So those are that was the heart of it. And it's about love. The sisters, as I say, they find each other again. This is about how they go on and continue their lives after the death of their mother. They've only got each other, and so love was core to everything. So from that early discussion I had with the publisher, you know, I mentioned when we were talking about the cover, that I had always a sense of charcoal drawings for Witch, and so we talked about perhaps me drawing for it. And so I did. I started drawing for Witch, and I suddenly saw that these drawings afforded me another way of immersing the reader, of looking through the main character's eyes. This is the way that Evie kills nature, and I wanted to give the things that she sees along the way on her journey, give them an innate energy and intensity. And also that, you know, that everything again is drawn from nature. So I started these at the beginning of the year, and I was drawing like a maniac towards the end, as we were getting the book ready for publication. But I think what happens with the books, with the illustrations, they sit at the head of each chapter, and they ground the story, and they give you a breather as you go into the next chapter. And also importantly, they give it there's an immersion, there's all the beauty going on with it. They're nice to look at, you know, that you want to kind of fall into them, and that was really important to me. And there's Cookworthy Nap. I don't know if you remember the photo from earlier, so using my own photo to do an illustration. It's been great really working with the publisher, and they've had such a great strong design sensibility, which I think you can see in all their books. And we wanted to pack Witch, make it a magical object really in its own right. And you know, books are magic after all, aren't they? You know, they have such power. So one of these lovely ideas I had was to certain points, and this is one of the kind of climactic points of the book, to spread the birds across the pages, and to, you know, have that kind of design again immersing you into the book. And I think it was, I was a bit cautious about it, thinking, well, hopefully it's not going to intrude on my lovely words, but it's I think it really adds to it. I think it and especially for a younger age group, it really has impact. I think to adapt it, always judge a book by its cover. So this design sensibility and Zephyr's willingness to have me involved, you know, that I'm a creative director by day, and I was well and truly wearing that hat. So they had the perfect jacket illustrator in mind for Witch. It's this fellow called Edward Betterson, and once Zephyr had introduced me to his, I thought his work was perfect. It combines this kind of old world illustrative style with a strident graphic nature, and his work has this straddles old and new worlds. So I think in that sense he was absolutely spot on for Witch. And I've shamelessly lifted these from Edward's website. There you go, edwardbetterson.com, you can see at the bottom. And the covers are so important. They're the first and fundamental sales tool. You're in a sea of other books out there, and so you need to focus on, you know, the heart of your book and think about how it will grab the reader. And I was just really pleased with all the details that Edward had drawn out of there, and all these little clues on the cover, so that again you can really kind of immerse yourself and absorb the cover. And I think he did it great service. And there you go, that's the final jacket. And I think it's awesome. I'm showing you that because it's about this balance. You know, it is a book about that has dark themes, but it's got color as well through it, that glows through it. And there's always life, and there's a sense of movement, you can see in the way that he's drawn these leaves and flames across it. So just in closing, during the copy edit phase, I was tallying up the word count, and you know, you're in copy edit, you get a lot of words that repeat themselves. So I had my naughty step of words. You might think that, you know, that they all, you know, they have to make sure they all fight for their place, and you know that when you're using a certain word, that it's demanded it. And a book like Witch, you'd think it would be something dark, right? But it came second in terms of the tally up, The most repeated word was light, which struck me as a really important thing about the heart of the book. You know, that light will out, that light fights against darkness and evil, that, you know, that light will show us the way. So in closing, I'd like to leave you all with a bit of light, that during these dark days, that you keep finding that light, and that may you all find your witching way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Finbar, very much indeed. Now, am I right in thinking you're happy to take some questions?
Of course.
Brilliant. If you could just stop sharing your
Yes,
screen for a moment
absolutely.
so that we can see you. That's brilliant. Okay, now, we obviously had a problem before with feedback. So if you wish to ask a question, could you either raise a hand, which is at the bottom of your screen, at the far right side, it says reactions, and there's a hand there. You can put your thumbs up or a clap or something like that. Or in the chat, just put Q. But actually, it would be easier for me if you raised a hand because, oh, actually, Carol, could you possibly keep an eye on the chat if I keep an eye on the hands? And the rest of you, could you not unmute yourselves unless you want to ask a question? Okay, so I'm looking for hands anywhere. I can't see one. I can't see you all.
Sydney, there's a question from Jan. Jan, do you want to ask it? He's asking about suitability of the book.
Super.
12, 13-year-old.
If you could unmute
hello.
yourself.
Thank you very much. We much enjoyed that, and we've got a granddaughter coming up for 13 next January, and I think it's a daft question, really, because I'm sure she'll think she's old enough to be 16-year-olds. But does she fit the demographic, as they say these days?
Yeah, absolutely, Jan. It's 12 plus, really, is the age group. So absolutely, she's that's perfect. And young adult is quite a loose phrase. I mean, a lot of kids that read a lot would get to it in kind of years. I've heard of year sixes that are finding witch, and kind of 10 or 11. There are dark themes there, but it's not gratuitous. It's not gory, and there are necessary things that I think that children should encounter in terms of these kind of dark themes. So, but you're absolutely fine. So, kind of 11, 12 onwards is perfect.
Thank you, Jan. Has anybody else got a question? Margaret, you look as if you're unmuted. Are you wanting to ask a question?
Yes, I've got a daughter-in-law who is very keen to become a writer, and she's got an agent and had one or two goes at it, but so far no success. You sound as if it really went pretty easily for you. How did you manage it?
How did I manage it? Well, I think that I do really mean it about that graft and the writing and rewriting. For the purposes of presentation, you'll have to kind of forgive me because it was putting things down very quickly. But the important point is that when I won representation, I was really delighted about that and got an agent. But from 2016 to 2019, I spent 3 years with the agent working on successive drafts, and there were obviously moments I think it's got to be ready. And as I say, it's quite late in the day when the book went, because for a long time we had the youngest who'd been offed, you know, and it was really pretty bleak. So I think I put that down to the relationship with Catherine, my agent, in terms of we just went through success for us, really, and you know, that's my personal.
It's a
you know,
slow
reaction.
process.
Yeah, but I would also encourage, the other thing that I've been talking about there is workshops, to encourage. Did you say it was your daughter-in-law, your daughter?
Yes, and my daughter-in-law, and she,
Yep.
yes, she has done a creative writing course.
Okay, but to keep that going with Scooby, which is the Society of Book Writers and Illustrators, to join up to that, about £100 a year. It's really remarkable, fantastic resource. They have lots of events, and they also, more importantly, have local workshop groups that you can join.
Right.
And to join that and bring your work to be critiqued in a group. And A, that really helps with you not feeling like you're on your own, and that sometimes you want to feel like giving up. And B, as I say, it helps in that sense of people are going to give you the God's honest truth. And if a lot of people are telling you the good things, but also you want to hear the things that need work, that's what you need to start looking at. So, and ultimately, just don't give up. Really don't give up. A lot of people good. Well, then I would say that from me.
And
Please
a hard
don't.
worker.
Please don't.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Well, then she's got it all there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Trevor, you're waving,
yeah.
and then Marianne.
Oh, good. We got lots of questions. Good. I must say, it looks a really good quality artifact as well as the writing. It looks beautiful
Thank you.
to look at and to handle. The only other literary work that I've ever read about witchcraft is the Crucible. Crucible. Are you familiar with that? I'm sure.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I knew it from school. Yeah.
And it's not really. It wasn't written as a book for young adults. Young adults seem to like it. But one of the very interesting things about it, of course, is it isn't really about witchcraft as about the 17th century. It's about. It seems to say that there is no such thing as witchcraft, but belief in it is a result of deep insecurities and fears within the broader society. And do you think your book reflects that?
Yeah, in a sense, but I also really wanted to go for it in terms of going, you know, right from the start. I decided right from the start that my witches were witches.
Yeah.
And yes, I do touch on those issues of how people perceived of, you know, the through the trials and history and all those things. But I made a conscious decision to go, no, I want my magic to be a thing, to be something that. So and that, because there are so many ways you can interpret it, and that I'm a huge fan of people like Ursula Le Guin and Rosemary Sutcliffe and Susan Cooper, and I grew up with all those children's writers who created magic in the world, but would also mix it with the real world. So that was my particular route. And I stuck to that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
No problem at all.
Thank you. Then Marianne, and I know John Clark has a question, and Mike is unmuted, so he may have a question after that. Marianne, you're muted at the moment. Marianne, unmute, please.
You're muted.
Am I audible now?
Mm-hmm.
I read the book and loved the language and the pictures. I thought they were beautiful.
Thank you.
And I was disconcerted by the fact that they were real witches.
Mm-hmm.
Because in a sense, the real witches justify the persecution due to fear.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought witches were a complete, complete fantasy, a complete superstition.
Sure.
And the persecution was, I don't know what, fear of women, fear of whatever. And it was completely unreal. But by making witchcraft real, you make the fear real, and to some extent justify not the murdering and killing, of course, but the persecution. And I found that a peculiar contradiction in the story. The witches were really witches and had powers that other people didn't. And that, in a sense, put them apart.
Yes, and I kind of connected with what was saying to Trevor there, that it's going on, you know, that why this ongoing prejudice. I made the witches a caste, a group, a race, if you like, that I wanted to, because that same child is in me that believes in magic and supernature and all those sorts of things. I grew up with all that sort of stuff, and I love it. So it was just a kind of instinct, but I wanted to make it that there are good witches and bad witches, and if you've read the book, you'll know about that as well. And in the same way, there are good and bad people. There are good and bad, you know, in any kind of tribe, I guess, in life. And that was the thing for me, that it isn't about how they're being portrayed. She was fighting back against this grotesque, you know, this monster, and saying something about her empowerment for her caste as well as empowerment for women. So, you know, that was the through line I had with it, that they are a tribe like any other and subject to persecution.
So you actually believe that witchcraft exists?
Well,
I find that amazing.
Not?
Because I don't know why not, but it does add another dimension to the problem. I mean, you know, I always thought of them as innocent women with perhaps herbal knowledge or funny ways or whatever,
yeah,
who were persecuted because they were old and women and they were easy to persecute.
Mm-hmm.
But this way, you're saying they were actually a different gifts.
Yes,
like
absolutely.
Clairvoyants or
yeah,
prophets.
and that there are healers, like her mother is a healer. I wanted to play it across all the different shades of it, really, and for people to kind of make their own minds up about it. But
it worried me in the book. Because I thought, well, they're not actually as innocent as I always thought the witches were.
Fair enough.
No? But I enjoyed the book, and I thought it was a wonderful production. Like Trevor says, it's a work of art in its own right, and well worth buying for any teenage kid or any adult who likes children's books, which actually I do. I think children's books are very good.
Absolutely.
When I had children, I really enjoyed reading books to them because I met all the children's books that had been published since I was a child.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Marianne. Thank you.
I totally agree with that.
John, Sorry, John, would you like to ask your question, which follows on nicely from what Marianne was saying?
Yes, it's actually my wife Rosemary's question.
Oh, Rosemary, then ask your question.
After that.
So my question was really about influences on your work, which is, to some extent you've already answered by mentioning Ursula Le Guin, I presume the Wizard of Earthsea series, but I wonder who else influenced your writing.
I'm a big reader of, big fan of. It always comes back to Ursula. I've read the Wizard of Earthsea, you know, certain books I read kind of every year, and I think I probably read Wizard of Earthsea and the Tombs of Atuan probably every year. People like Joan Aitken, Rosemary Sutcliffe, Nina Borden, are all the kind of people I grew up with. Susan Cooper, The Dark is Rising. I've got my original copy of The Dark is Rising. I always read The Dark is Rising at this time of the year, because it's got that wonderful snow scenes in it and the wolves, and just it scares me still. And I can feel the hairs going up, and it returns me to that childlike state. I think kind of more recent writers, people like Patrick Ness, really a big fan of. But I guess me being, growing up, you always go back to those books, the people I grew up with. So I always kind of return to those children. Right, there are the people that in terms of adults that I really admire. The Michael Hurley, incredible writer, Starvaker and The Lonely. It's sort of, there's a number of people, but those are the core ones for the children's writers.
Wonderful, thank you very much.
Can I just add to that, Finbar, on a very practical note? What did you earn to make a living between 2013 and 2016?
well, I remember, John, I was still working and still am full-time at art. So I wrote whenever I could find the time. I used to write my lunch hours at Ardman. I still write lunch hours. You snatch moments. It comes back about 300 words a day, you know, really before all the Zooms start at work. You've got 20 minutes, half an hour. And you get that little dopamine hit because you've hit your 300 words, and you may write more than that. That's totally cool. But then you stop that kind of little irritated with yourself nag. You may go back and rewrite those 300 words, but you feel like, oh, you know, I've crept a little bit closer down a path. And that's that little step is massively important. So I still work. I took this year, because I had advance for the 2-book deal with Zephyr. It was the first time I've done it since I've worked at Ardman. I've taken a day unpaid a week, but pretty much that's over the course of this year. But pretty much it cancels out the advance for loss of salary, but it gives me time, really. But most of the year has been finishing Witch. I didn't really get all the bits of Witch finished till the summer. It went out August, I think, was the last bits, and then I've been doing publicity and finally got back to my second book, which I'm back on the creeping along the path again now.
We look forward very much to, as huge fans of Ursula Le Guin, and the children would still say it was one of the seminal books of growing up. So they're all now going to have to read yours.
That's great. Well, there's a nice bit of serendipity just to end on that. The local bookshop, Mr. B's bookshop, Emporium of Delights. It was the first time I'd ever done it. The first time I went to a bookshop and you know, defaced it. I think, am I allowed to do this? They said yes. You did sign your book, and they had 2 copies. So it was a kind of magical moment. The first time I ever seen my book in a bookshop, and it was my favourite bookshop in Bath. And I looked closer at the shelves, and they had it face out on the bookshelf, and the book right next to Witch. What do you think it was? Wizard of Earthsea. So thank you, Ursula, wherever you are.
Thank you. Now, Mike didn't have a question. I can't see any hands.
Ross has a question.
Ross. Oh, and yes,
oh, this would be a good
Graham
one.
as well, I think. So Ross, wherever you are, can you unmute?
I'm here.
Yes, I spot you now.
Thank you, Finbar. That's fantastic. So you're talking about a second book. Is that going to be Witch 2 or something else?
It's not Witch 2 in the sense that we're not continuing the journey with these group of characters and what happens the next. I do have thoughts on what that would be. I kind of got bits and pieces scribbled down. But the second book is a 2-book deal with Zephyr. The second book is really that I put in a drawer that I wrote when I came out of that Arvon course, and I started writing away, and I'd got the bug, and I got up to about 30,000 words of this book. And then when Evie and Witch came along in the first term, it kind of she needed to be answered there and then, so I got distracted. So it's unfinished business. I've gone back to, but I knew this was going to happen, and once I made that decision to park 30,000 words and return to it, I've joined the books. I've linked them. So the stone that appears in Witch, that's an important magical object, appears in the second book. And the second book is set give you a very loose idea. It's set in modern day, and it's about a boy who's going through trauma. He's lost his dad. He's an army soldier, and he gets an incident out in the desert. He's going through grief, and he finds a stone. He finds a magical stone, and it kind of ... I'll leave it at that. That's the things that happen to him. But it's told now, and I'm very interested in a book in a book that my daughter, will appeal to, in the sense the things that she, her school day and the people that she hangs out with and the issues she deals with, and that better. She read Witch, but she probably wouldn't have picked up Witch, I think, off the shelf. So I'm trying, that's my challenge, is trying to write a book, a contemporary book that would appeal to, yeah, to the contemporary teenagers, really, that wouldn't necessarily go, oh, it's a historical book, it's not for me. So that's really what's going on with two.
That sounds amazing, and I think it's quite interesting is that I read Witch. I've also listened to the audiobook as well, and they're two very, very different experiences, but I didn't feel it almost was a children's book. I felt it was far broader. It, outside of the, your use of language, it's very, very short and clipped, which you could say, appeals to children in that basis. But I didn't think it was. I think it had a much more universal appeal than being something that was. Obviously, you were writing for a particular audience, a particular demographic, but when it comes down to it, I personally enjoyed it much more than I thought I would do.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and I think that's you should never really, you say, I'm drawn to children's books because it's part of me. It's part of, I have always read children's books. I always will. I read lots of different things, and kind of natural, like anything that you find. But I think when in the process of writing Witch, I certainly didn't think I'm writing for children. You don't go into it in that way. You write to connect with that audience, but you write as best as you possibly can. And I think in the sense that there are certain things that are going on with the teenage age group in terms of certain themes that I was talking about there, the things that teenagers, the frustrations they hit, they're wanting to find where they're going in life, all those sorts of things that were necessarily part of it when I went into it. But absolutely, I'm delighted that you think that anybody can read it, and that we talk about certain books that remain classics that can you go back to. And Catherine Rundell wrote an incredible book this year about, I think, I can't remember the name of the title, but it's along the lines of, so you think children's books are just for children? Nobody should read that book, because it's about, the secret that we've all known about children's books, that they're incredible things, and that they can be read by any age group. And that's why there are certain classics that we always come back to, because they speak to the young person. I think that's the thing. They give you that sudden release and freedom, and that's certainly what I've discovered as a result of writing Witch. And I think as a result of writing Witch, I've become a better writer. The MA was great, and as I say, it gave me a nose for it. But doing those hard yards makes you realise, the importance of getting things right and getting a balance right. So yeah. So I'm all for classics.
Thank you. Now, Carol has her hand up, and Graham also had his hand up before. Can I just take Graham first?
Right, thank you. Thank you.
Say no other questions after Carol's, because it's 8:30 already. Anyway, Graham, over to you.
Thank you very much. Finbar, at one stage, you showed us the extract from your book. I don't know the story, but it was a trial or hearing where the frenzied crowd shouted, "Hang them," several times. This reminded me of the Bible story in the New Testament of the trial, where the frenzied crowd there shouted, "Crucify him." Did you intend to make that connection?
Not, Graham, not deliberately, no. But I think that in terms of it's interesting how crowd scenes immerse themselves, right, in terms of in our subconscious and our imaginations. Those certainly my research, I guess, and my reading around that, reading about these trials and reading about Matthew Hopkins and the fact that he would that the religion was used as a weapon, effectively, sometimes to whip up hysteria, to whip up that kind of prejudice. And
Yeah.
But that's not to say that the people that were law-abiding and abiding, that they went about their ways, and that, you know, that it was just being used. And again, this is quite relevant to now, you know, that this happens a lot. Things that are done in the name of religion that really shouldn't be. As we all know, wars are fought, right? And so I think it was the thing that we've all got a sense of a mob and how it can get out of control with, you know, in the wrong hands, I guess. And that's what it was about.
Thank you, Finbar. Very good point.
Thank you. Carol.
Thanks, Finbar. I have to say, I actually read very little young adult fiction, and so this was a complete surprise and delight to me. And in fact, listening to it was so brilliant. I've never walked so far, because I just continue. I just kept on going for a long time. That was really positive. But what really struck me as well is I was interested to know how you know when you've got the right idea. Because I could never be a writer, because I did to one of those workshops where they tore it apart and I destroyed. You know, how do you keep going with it and knowing it's the right idea to stick with?
Yeah, that's a really good question. How do you know? I think you have to put yourself out there. I think you have to think about, go into yourself first and think about the things that are important to you. And, you know, don't necessarily go out and go, right, I'm just going to write a story about X. You know, there's a thing called free writing, right, where you can just write any thoughts that come to you. And, you know, people sometimes, I say that walking is writing. And it is a lot, because you'll be thinking, you won't necessarily be the act of sitting at a desk and kind of trying to grind these words out, kind of bash them into the page. And I think that's really important, that things come to you. Sometimes you're in that kind of alpha state, right? When you're might be thinking intensely about something else, and that something suddenly pops into your head. And those moments are really important. So record it down, or put it in a notebook, but just capture it quickly, because that sense of kind of dream state is really important. Those ideas and those little animals and characters that sit along the edge of our subconscious are telling you something. And I think that's where the kind of magic lies. Start developing it, but get feedback. You know, before I went to Arvon, I was bristling with malcontent. I tried not to go. I tried to cancel it. I washed my phone. I upset my family in many different ways. And eventually I kind of I didn't leave my wife alone in terms of ringing her up, saying, I've got to this wrong place. Why am I here? You know, and I know what this was. You know, weeks later, I didn't realize. I stopped, her phone stopped, the text stopped halfway through that week, because I started writing. And I realized what that was. And Arvon really is very clever psychotherapy for writers. And anybody, I would encourage anybody who's interested in writing to go to an Arvon, because it gets you to, it centers you, and it gets you to think about exactly the thing you're talking about, Carol. How do you know? You kind of have to go to places, and you have to kind of sit with things. And what Arvon's really good about is putting you through exercises to do that. And how do you do it? It is like a form of therapy in a sense, and you're eventually, the output of it is the written word. But if you're really seriously interested in writing, then also, as I've said earlier, write often. Don't think about the mountain, but write these little bits and pieces down that could be only a few words. Somebody said it the other day on Twitter, Juno Dawson, the young adult writer. She said the same in tweet. She said, just write just a few words every day. So it doesn't need to be if 300 words is a mountain, just write 10, 15. It doesn't really matter, but that all helps. And then you also start to get, but you need to get feedback. You need to put yourself out there. And until I did that, that was the kind of the moment for me, until I actually started to get people going, oh, this is interesting what you're doing here, but this bit here, kind of doesn't really connect or doesn't really get close to the character. And writing is there is a technique involved in it, whereby you go, oh, okay, what would you mean by closeness? Well, what's that character thinking at that moment? Is there something they're particularly seeing? Can they smell anything? Can they hear anything? It's the senses you can use, but it's those kind of tricks get you closer into a character. But also slowly the story will come. I mean, I can't emphasize it. You know, that's 9 drafts of that book. It doesn't have to be 9. Can be, you know, it could be 90. But slowly the story will come. I don't think it comes in terms of like, I'm going to write a story about da 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 da. You know, go to something that's closer than that. You know, go to start sketching a character. Or the good thing is like sitting in, listening to people in cafes. Write down what people say, because the human language is fascinating, and how people use, how people talk, and you'll get details from that, and you'll get a sense of character from that, and ultimately, all story comes from character. So work on character first, and it could be somebody you know, or a family, and kind of sketch them. You know, like Dickens did, right? He started doing sketches. You know, he was a legal clerk, wasn't he? He used to go a reporter for the courts, and he used to just write. He had written sketches of the people that he saw, and it evolved from there. He didn't, you know, and then the story would come. But all story comes from character, unless you're kind of a, you know, Hollywood producer and kind of high concept piece. But you're, you know, in that sense, it's interesting. Somebody wrote about James Bond. You know, James Bond never changes. You know, and essentially is not that interesting a character. The interesting things happen to Bond, but he doesn't really ever change. Doesn't really ever have an arc. You know, and it's kind of, that's where it all lies. He kind of stays single note, but it comes down to that really. It's find your character first.
Thank you, Finbar. Thank you so much for sharing this evening with us, and for giving us a tremendous insight into your journey in bringing this, your first book, we hope not your last.
I hope so too.
And just for revealing so much about the history, about yourself, about that journey. It has been fascinating, and I do hope that everybody who hasn't yet bought Witch, who's here tonight, will go out to buy it in one form or another, and to pass it on as well, and let others know too. So now down at the bottom, under reactions, you do have clapping hands. Otherwise, switch your videos on and clap yourselves. And before we go, could I just hand over to Carol just to tell us about our forthcoming meetings as well? But thanks again to Finbar. Thank you.
Pleasure, a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you all, brilliant. It's lovely to see all these lovely faces. Thank you to our co-hosts, the Leamington Literary Society. It's lovely to see you all, and we value your presence so much. That's fantastic. I've learned so much. To say that coming up, sorry, you might have to take off your phones, we're all muting. Anyhow, coming up in the new year, we have the leader of Warwick District Council, Andrew Day, who's going to give us a little bit of a vision of what our town and district looks like, because obviously we're all experiencing a lot of change. We've also got Nigel Shanahan, who's the, I don't know if you've seen the beautiful new building, number 1 Mill Street, which was formerly the, I pronounce this incorrectly, Urquhart Hall, you'll know it as. And Stephanie is somewhere here. Stephanie Kerr will be talking, who's the director of Bid Leamington. And also Abby Plum, who's an ambassador for women in gaming. So there's a number of talks. I know the Literary Society are doing some talks as well. We're really keen. These are very strange times for us all. So please do feel that we can all cross-promote, share, because I think, you know, tonight's been a lovely example of when you get a fantastic insight, great speaker, and really learn a lot. And I can give a plug to both societies to say, please do join them and support them. The wonderful Margaret and Marianne set us up with a wonderful gift. You can now gift actually the Leamington Society membership. So I know what I'm getting for every single member of my family and friends all in Leamington this year. It's easy now, they're all getting membership. So do please remember those, and just remember to share those things. And a final thank you to you all for attending, and a huge thank you to Finn. I cannot wait to read your second book. That was just a joy. And final round of applause to you all, and thank you, Sydney, for being a wonderful host.
Thank you very much, and good night to you all.
Stay safe.
Thank you for coming.
Bye, everyone. Nice to meet you.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.